Good morning. So who's excited about advertising on Netflix? Who has money they just cannot wait to give to Netflix? Okay. So, we're going to get right to Robert, but I reached out to my second choice to speak first, just to ask him what I thought he might, in case he had any. This is a guy who worked at Lycos, and he worked at iVillage, and he worked at NBCU, and then he spent some time building Hulu's business from a couple $100 million to a couple $1 billion in ad revenue. Spent some time at Snap driving brand. He's unemployed right now, and I thought he might have a moment to respond. And I said, hey, what do you think about, what should I tell the session about what an ad-supported tier would mean for TV marketers? His name's Peter Naylor. Anybody know Peter? Anybody know his new job? He's unemployed right now. By the end of this month, he becomes the head of sales at Netflix. So you don't have to worry. We don't need to do the session. He said, ad-supported tier means good things for marketers! Exclamation point. Robert. Oh, by the way, we came in from New York, but he's Canadian. Robert.
Born and raised.
What does this mean? What should they be thinking about?
I think that, like your enthusiasm was a little settled, I think we just need to take a step back and let's see how it evolves. I think, one, they're going to need a little bit of time to really figure this out on a number of fronts. Let's start with pricing. I think that's going to get some overzealousness in the beginning, and I think there's going to be some demand, but I think that's going to correct itself, right? The second is the technology. We're going to let them measure. That'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Their own ad techs, things like that are going to have to be figured out. And then third is the consumer side of it, right? Like, where are they going to put all this ad load stuff? Are you going to be watching Squid Games and suddenly get an ad in the middle of it? Probably not. So where is it going to go? How's it going to be deployed? So I think there's some excitement, but I think we need to be cautious as we move forward.
Okay, so Guy had some amazing slides with showing over $5 billion over the next few years that could develop. Let's talk about how realistic about that and what are the issues. So consumer side, market. What are the things people need to be thinking about? In other words, can they consume? I mean, there isn't any ad inventory today. The content that is on Netflix, in most cases, explicitly forbids advertising, so those rights need to be renegotiated, so they've got to go get new content. The subscribers, do they want to cannibalize? What are the things they should be thinking about?
Guy mentioned this, we were chatting back there. The #1 program on Netflix is Friends. So as Dave said, the rights, I think what we have to think is, and I'm talking from an advertiser perspective, go ahead.
I was going to say, Friends, #1 show. Who is willing to pay a $65 US for a P2 Plus ad in Friends on a TV?
Right. Now
that
we're
is
back
the minimum.
to reality.
You know that is the minimum. You've all seen it, or a lot of you have seen the deck. That's the minimum on a P2 Plus basis.
Right. I think this goes to the challenge that we have in the video marketplace in general, is fragmentation, right? And how they're going to have to deal with that, and how we as marketers, I'm coming from a marketer side, I'm an operator, and that's what my gig is. So I come at it saying, how do I handle fragmentation? And we're going to need to figure that out, and they're going to need to figure out where they're going to load their ads and how they're going to distribute them.
How about marketing? I mean, you ran marketing at JP Morgan Chase earlier. Right now, consumers take Netflix as they want. If they binge watch it, the show comes out, they watch it. But that doesn't necessarily align with what an advertiser needs if they need the audience on a Monday, on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, on a Thursday.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that it sounds good, and I think that Netflix and as others are going to have to figure out where live TV is, as we were talking about. Do they get into sports? I think that's an interesting thing to think about, because that is where a lot of dollars are and predictability for the marketer.
We'll talk about that. Talk about that a little bit more on sports.
I mean, that's the best ticket in town. That's where there's demand. You have that lean-in audience. That's my other speech that I like to give, is that not all video is the same. The quality metric of the video and what type of video viewing it is, what device it is on, those are big deals. And that's where the NFL and the football dominates today, and that's where there's so much demand. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the market captures that and shifts that between either Netflix getting into that business, Amazon's current play in that area, and others potentially going there as well.
So Robert, clearly one of the strategies for Netflix is going to be to access the TV ad dollars. I mean, that's what's in front of them. At this point, what do we know about measurement, and what can we expect? I mean, do we expect an ad server? Do we expect this in every single market that they're going to become part of the jig? Will they become part of the TV measurement? Will they be measured the same way?
I don't think we know. right? I think it's still early. I think it's still being defined, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves and our tolerance as marketers with our dollars of how we help them get through that process. I think that's going to take some work, more than people give it credit for. I think that's maybe 12 to 18 months before it gets normalized? Yeah. Is that a fair?
So let's just pretend you're back in your JP Morgan Chase hat. You get the call from the team from Microsoft. They come in, they show you the presentation. You're there with your team from Zenith presenting it. What are the questions that you're asking explicitly, and what are the demands that you're making? Because it's a $20 million minimum on a per agency basis, probably for a marketer like JP Morgan Chase. It would be something like that, $10 or $20 million minimum to get in. What would you be asking to be part of that $10 to $20 million minimum for 2023?
Audience guarantees. What am I getting for my money? When am I getting it? And how am I getting it? And what predictability I have? What kind of make goods am I going to be able to get? How am I going to be able to leverage technology to target? How am I going to be able to measure the output and impact of those programs? I think understanding how I integrate into third-party measurement, because I want somebody else watching the cookie jar a little bit there. So I'd be pushing them hard on how they're going to play in the ecosystem to make sure that my money is well spent.
What about creative? I mean, this obviously is going to be one of the questions. I mean, would you be valuing a pre-roll the same as a mid-roll, the same as a post-roll? What's your expectation on creative length?
Yeah, I think that I've invested a lot in certain standards today that I would expect them to follow and make sure that I can take advantage of. And if I have to change, I'm going to expect a significant incentive to do that. I think that I need to be able to press a button and be able to leverage my assets at scale. And I think that's going to be a big requirement. And we'll see how they respond to those types of things.
What about things like separations? Would you expect separations?
For sure. I think that that's part of the standard offering that I expect today, and I would see no reason why not to expect it from them.
So, as we know today, a lot of the ad-supported streaming services have co-selling deals with the distributors. If it's distributed off of Samsung TV or off of Roku or off of a Google TV, there's essentially a cut. Yeah. There's something up to 20, sometimes more than 20% of the inventory that is controlled by this third party. That clearly has the opportunity to create over-frequency issues, collisions of ads and competitors. We haven't seen that solved in streaming. Would you be willing to give them a pass on that?
Like I said, I think it's going to take time for them to solve it. I don't know that pass is the right word, but I think it's going to normalize their value and price point, because I think it's going to take time.
Let's get specific on that. That's a little soft. That will normalize the price point. You're not, $65 P2 Plus, what are you going to say?
I want a better price.
Now,
and to be fair, again,
what if the rumors are true that Microsoft has a minimum guarantee back to Netflix that's very close to that number that must be met?
I think they will need to figure that out themselves. I don't think the marketer should pay that freight, and I think we're going to have to be united in that message. But like I said, listen, let's not confuse things. There's a lot of enthusiasm. They're a blue chip brand, and I think they're smart people that are going to figure it out. And Peter's a smart guy, has been there a while, and knows how to been in the industry a while, and I think he knows what the challenge is. But there's work to be done.
Good. So, what I like is we try to set up a lot of the skepticism, because obviously this has been so much excitement about this, and it's going to change the world. Now I want to shift to, you're good friends with Peter Naylor. You've known him a long time. What are the conversations that you have with him, not just to make sure I got what is worth it to me today, but what would be the kinds of things that you would like to see Netflix do more holistically, long-term, the holy grails, the things that maybe have never been done? This is Ted Sarandis at Cannes talked about bringing a whole different way of advertising to the game as they did with the product, truly delighting viewers. What would be the kinds of things you would like to see sort of long-term that maybe they could do for you?
Well, Dave, you and I have chatted a lot in our dinners about measurement. As a marketer, we've gone backwards in measurement, so I'd love to see some forward thinking there of how to show efficacy, both in the top of the funnel, middle funnel, and bottom funnel. And I don't know that I'm confident that they're going to go tackle that, but I think that would be one area. I think understanding frequency, like you hinted at earlier, I think our industry is challenged at managing that. It puts an excessive load on the marketer and agency side from a planning perspective to manage reach and frequency across all our media. they're not going to be the only media game in town, just so we're clear, right? And that's unrealistic. I think they'll be a serious player, and I think they'll be on the top of the RFP. But at the same time, they have to play with the others. So I think creative, audience, and measurement are the three big buttons that I would have for Mr. Naylor.
So to make it a little bit more specific again, it's rumored or has been presented that the frequency guarantee will be at 3 per day. Now, what I find interesting is in the world of digital, that's actually a relatively tight frequency cap. But in the world of television, 21 per week is not necessarily a tight frequency cap. Is that something that you would want to put pressure on?
Yes, I'd like to better understand how they got to that and how they can show me how they could do that. I think that I'm still skeptical at the measurement. And again, we have also another thing that we haven't talked about yet, and I think Guy started to, which is the way consumers are consuming video content is again changing. We just went through this flux and now we're normalizing a little bit. Again, fragmentation is going to be there. How are they going to play in that game and make sure that they can make those numbers?
Yeah. One thing I did not hear you say, but I've heard, like I heard on the breakfast panel significantly, and we hear a lot in our industry, is content. Mm-hmm. I didn't hear you talking about the content. I mean, we talked a little bit about sports, the association with the content. In the television world, there's a lot of predictability and understanding about, am I selling you into news or sports, or am I selling you into dramas or reality? Am I selling you into the hottest show? Am I selling you into day parts? Would you have that same kind of expectation for Netflix? Would you imagine it's just a broad audience-based buy and that's how you would think about it?
My perception is today it's more broad audience, and I think they're going to have to figure that out and how they're going to package what they have, and to your point on the rights, what they can actually sell. Because again, I think it's going to be small in the beginning, right? It's not going to be the whole platform. You're not going to get it all, even with unlimited dollars. I think it's going to take some time to iterate what products they really have to sell, and I think that'll be an evaluation that all marketers are going to have to figure out. The other thing I think I thought you were going to talk about a little bit about is, and I think this was the point that we talked in the back that hit me the hardest, is that they are not an ad-supported company today. That is not Netflix's DNA in any shape or form. They are a content company. Who is king there is very different than who's king at Turner, ESPN, and the other networks. And I think that's going to be a shift for them to figure out over the next few years on how that manifests.
Let's talk a little bit more about the culture of that.
Yeah.
Obviously, in Netflix, Reed Hastings and Ted Sarandos are, certainly the frickin' frack might not be the right word, but they're certainly the dominant, forceful personalities in the marketplace. In the world of television, that's not typically the case. I mean, by far the most, and this would be my Americanized version, but I also know the names here. But in NBC Universal, it's Linda Yaccarino. I mean, she is front, center, everything. I don't think anybody knows Jeff Shell. I don't think he's, met people, and he's the CEO of the company. Yeah. Do you think, and you've had some exposure to the top leadership at Netflix, and as a McKinsey person, and you think about organizational dynamics, are you think they're ready not to be the top dogs at the company?
Yeah.
I mean, I suspect Ted's in town, right? Right? I mean, we've got
isn't he coming on
the
stage?
film festival, right? I think Ted's in town.
I think this is going to be a shift that they're going to have to make sure they understand what they're willing to shift to. I kind of equate when Apple got into the ad business early on, if you remember that, and then they pulled back. And I think Apple realized what it was good at and what it wanted to be good at and how it wanted to do it. And I think Netflix is going to do the same learning process. I'm excited that they've hired Peter and some really smart people, and hopefully give them the cover and the support that they need to be successful, but it's not going to be day one. It's going to take time to evolve with any change management program, and McKinsey, by the way, is happy to help with any of those.
But it's interesting what you're saying, because let's talk about Apple. I mean, how do you think the advertising partners felt that thought they were making a long-term commitment to one of the most valuable companies in the world and one of the most important consumer electronics companies, computer companies, and that they pulled the plug on that business? Do you think that's actually a realistic outcome here? I mean, could you imagine a scenario that Netflix reverses itself in a few years?
I don't want to speculate on that, but I mean, listen, I think anything's possible. I think they are a content company at core, right? That's what they're great at, and that's what's gotten to this point. I think to the discussion we're having on culture of being an ad-supported business and what that means in terms of management, the way they run the company, the choices that they're going to have to make. I joked about Squid Game. If you're in the ad-supported business, you're putting an ad in Squid Game, right? You're making those hard choices, and you are moving off the path that got you there with the consumer, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but that's something they're going to have to figure out and juggle on, right?
Marketing. So you're going to have to make some decisions in segmentation around your core subscribers that are paying you premium not to see ads. You're going to have to make decisions on where you're going to find the people that will take ads, whether you're going to take them. Guy told us we've hit saturation in the North American markets, Western Europe, Australia. So you're going to have to determine who you're going to go after. Are they prepared to put the kind of marketing dollars behind this? In other words, for a company that's expecting $5 billion of advertising revenue, they're certainly going to be needing to spend a couple $2 billion on an annual basis to not just to support the tier, but to drive the viewership.
I think intellectually, I'm sure they are, and I'm sure they've thought it through. Again, they're smart people. I think that practically they're going to have to build that muscle. Again, the muscle that they say the studios have when they launch a movie is exceptional and well-developed with years of experience. They're going to have to build that same muscle. They're going to have to build the agile marketing capabilities, the data capabilities, all those things that we as marketers all have to continue to do that. That's something they haven't had to do to this point. I think that's going to be an interesting capability that they're going to have to maximize in a very competitive market with a whole bunch of other streaming players, right? It's not like they're coming in the first, they're coming in last.
So that raises an interesting point, which is probably how do they accelerate their movement into the market and try to go from last to first. So we know they've taken some steps, just announced some internal leadership. We know that they have a deal with Microsoft, apparently a multi-year deal on a global basis to provide both technology and sales for the platform. A lot of people have speculated that they're going to have to own their infrastructure, that they've a company that's never really been a partnering company out there. They like to build their own production. They like to drive that. Just think openly, like, you know targeting, measurement, activation. Do you imagine they need to build their own demand-side platform, own it? Do you think they'll just rent one for a long period of time?
I think, like you said, culturally, those are the trade-off decisions they're going to have to make of getting to market fast and having those solutions versus balancing their culture of owning things. My instinct says they're going to figure out how to build it and try to invest in doing that and owning it. And I think that, again, those will be interesting markers to see if they can hit and have success with it, because others have tried and failed, and I think they'll have to navigate that. I think that's a long road, like I said earlier. I think this is going to take some time to figure out. I think that I'll generalize and say I think the video marketplace is really messy right now. As a marketer, it's hard for an agency and a marketer to buy. I think that means that the consolidation will happen, and I think there'll be opportunities to acquire stuff to bolster some of those capabilities.
So I want to put some numbers in perspective, because I think, and I'm going to use some U.S. market numbers, and I apologize for that. I'm just not as fluent with some of the percentages here, but I know they seem to be pretty closely tracking to Guy's numbers for the Canadian market. So in the U.S. market today, 32-ish% of all viewing on television is streamed. It's about a third. But only 5% of all advertising viewing on television is streamed, because the majority does not carry ads or carries very light ad loads. And so what we understand is that, and Netflix represents of all that is streamed about 1/7, 1/6. So let's just say that's about 6 points or so, 6 or 7 points in the US market. And so let's just say, if you look at the slides up there, and we say it'll be about a 20% of the total will actually be in an ad-supported gap. You may have 2% of the US market in several years. What would you do as a marketer or as an advisor to marketers that they should do for someone that delivers 2% of the advertising load in a market? How high should you pay? How much should you expect?
Do you think you should be a defense attorney? Or that's a different question. Listen, I think that, again, as an advertiser, we want scale, we want efficiency with our dollar, we want to reach the right people at the right time and measure it.
With that, we're going to complete our discussion. By the way, we love Netflix and Peter Naylor, but really
do.
thought it was important to make sure that we bring
wish
a
them
certain
good
amount
success.
of skepticism to this, and we wish them a lot of success. Thank you.
You got it.
Awesome.